Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Wakefield, Vice President of the CONVERGED User Group and Director of Platform Services at Oshkosh Corporation. Today, we have a great presentation. I'm joined by Shannon Champion, Vice President of Product Marketing for CI, HCI, and Primary Storage at Dell Technologies, and a longtime friend of the CONVERGED User Group. Welcome, Shannon.
Thanks, Matt. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation about emerging trends today.
That's awesome. Can you spend a few minutes setting the stage for us?
Absolutely. So, we're here to talk about future trends, but I just want to take a few minutes to kind of set the stage for the conversation and what we're seeing at Dell Technologies related to the drivers for modern infrastructure. And I think many of our converged user group users are already kind of appreciating a lot of this. Today's businesses look a lot different than they did a decade ago, and IT is more critical than ever to the organization's success. And the three, main pillars here really is more of a digital first world. I think, everything has been digital over the past year by necessity, but we're already heading in that direction. And like I said, that really brings IT to the heart of the enterprise. Also, exponential data growth. We're seeing data explosion, unconventional types of data sources, and it's more distributed. It's everywhere in the edge, driving Internet of Things and all of the devices that are everywhere in our lives. And obviously, the need for constant change, not only in the past year with what the pandemic required, but we were already in that state of like having to rapidly adjust to things that were changing in the macro environment from an IT perspective. So that's really what we're seeing. Would you agree? These are kind of what users are,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
certainly the last year has accelerated some of the technology changes that were already in play, and I totally agree. We're seeing a rapid shift in the industry.
Yeah. So as a result of that, we're really thinking most organizations are kind of rethinking their application strategies. So we're seeing new cloud native scale out application architectures that are helping IT deliver more agility and elasticity that's required by their developers. And then also an increased use and really reliance on more data analytics, the use of AI and ML, both from an application perspective, but also driving into the infrastructure, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then multi-cloud deployments. So, I think a lot of organizations today are trying to figure out what workloads belong where. What is my cloud strategy that's going to work best for my organization? So these are kind of some of the drivers around application strategies that we're seeing. And really, both of these things we feel are driving what we're considering to be kind of the imperatives for IT leaders around what it takes to have modern infrastructure. So, obviously, agility and automation, and really a hyper focus on maximizing simplification of operations, but still having an eye on what those core SLA outcomes are. We have to deliver the performance and scale and meet the SLAs. That can't come at the expense of simplification. And then security everywhere. So all that data we talked about and it being in more and more places makes security kind of come front and center. So those would be the three kind of areas of, IT really has to deliver in all three of these buckets and in order to deliver modern infrastructure. So that brings us to the emerging trends, and this is where we'll spend most of the time talking about today. Really, these are spanning three categories. There's the DPU, or data processing units, also known as SmartNICs for advanced offload, and we consider that a foundational technology. And then the second bucket is around deployment architectures. So we'll talk a little bit about disaggregation and composability and how that's playing in the emerging trend space, and then spend a little bit of time talking about IT operating models, and in particular, infrastructure automation with AI ops, and this whole concept of consuming IT as a service. So with that landscape set, let's dive in and talk about these a bit more in terms of like how they relate to the converged user group members and what they're dealing with day to day, how these trends are impacting them, and the things that they really should be thinking about. So the first
I think
topic.
these are some very interesting topics for our members. So yeah, let's dive in and look at each one of these.
Perfect. All right. I want to start with SmartNIC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So DPU, like I said, it stands for data processing unit. So you may also hear it referred to as SmartNIC. With DPU, at the basic core, it's about several functions that were traditionally run on the CPU that can now be offloaded and distributed onto the DPU. These are functions like traditional networking and switching functions, application and hypervisor tasks, control plane and security functions. And when we think about, okay, well, that's great, that's what it is, but how does it benefit me? What we're seeing, I mean, I think two clear areas. One is if you're offloading the CPU, then you have improved application performance for those prioritized applications that are still on the CPU. So you have better performance and density there. And the second is really, I mentioned traditional networking and switching functions being offloaded. So this opportunity is really for a switchless networking at the edge. So if you can think of like an edge deployment, you have a single node VxRail, no physical switching. That opens up a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, I think a lot of our members are seeing lots of edge deployments. So certainly, if there's a scenario where you can do an edge deployment without dedicated switches, I think that would be of great interest to a lot of folks, because obviously the less equipment you have, the lower the price points and the less support you have to provide. I think that's a super interesting development.
Yeah, we agree.
So talking about edge switches kind of leads us into the next topic, which is the new deployment architectures. Disaggregated and composable infrastructure. What exactly does that look like in the market?
I feel like everyone's going to have a different answer to that question. There's a lot of different perspectives, I think. So depending on who you ask, this has been emerging for a little while. From a Dell Technologies perspective, we believe a few things specifically about disaggregation, composability. Fundamentally, it's about being able to pool granular resources. So taking CPU, storage, memory, GPU, for example, and pooling them across your physical nodes. So the concept that the resources aren't tied to nodes, but they're virtualized, abstracted, and pooled is needed. And even the ability to have enough flexibility to construct, retire, then reconstruct these resource pools rapidly and on demand kind of opens up a new world of opportunities. So, when we think about this, it's utmost flexibility and fluidity, and those are kinds of some of the words that we use to describe it. But it's not just about the individual components themselves. Really need to maintain that unified framework across the infrastructure layers for management and orchestration. So it's still a simplified operating model, but just with like so much more flexibility.
Yeah, I kind of think of this almost like a Lego analogy, where you have different pieces that you can put together, but with the benefit of all still being fully managed within the LCM structure. I think that's of great interest to folks. As we look for flexibility in how we construct our infrastructures, that ability to add components but still have a unified management is very interesting.
I love that metaphor. I mean, I'm in marketing, so I'm going to take a note for a future program built around Legos to get this concept across. I love it. The second thing really for us around disaggregation is that we believe it's a broader infrastructure concept than a single product category. I think you've heard of disaggregated HCI, for example. And when you think about that, we think really there's demand for new deployment models, particularly in an HCI world, a software defined world. They're going to continue to evolve because, probably within the, community for Converged User Group, there's a range of use cases related to, the different deployment models that are needed and how you want to scale compute and storage, particularly, or connect to external storage. And these are going to continue to evolve. And so trying to subcategorize it is going to be increasingly more challenging. So we're not intending to sort of play in that game, but rather to go with the concept that our HCI offerings really are very dynamic. We can hit those disaggregated HCI use cases, but we can even go beyond what sort of the current market definition is for those. So I really think we need to consider the customer drivers and not just, like I said, the components and how they fit together, but what are customers needing in terms of their operating model, in terms of how these pieces integrate together and how they're managed. So there's a wide range of requirements and preferences. So that's why we think it's a broader infrastructure concept and not a singular category.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We've seen folks get caught up in the terminology, and I know a lot of analysts are still struggling to put their arms around how to define these things. Like what exactly do you call it when you have if you have a VX rail that's connected to a power store, if you have a VX rail dynamic node, maybe without vSAN that's using storage from an AC or HCI mesh deployment. I mean, the traditional categories of some of these definitions, just may not be relevant. And I think there's going to have to be entirely new categories and definitions constructed to capture some of this. But at the end of the day, it's all about what our members and customers want to do. It's not about what you call something, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you just hit on some perfect examples of why a subcategory doesn't hit. Those are two specific use cases that are real. They're out there and available today. VxRail connected to a power store, VxRail dynamic node with HCI mesh. And so what we're not going to try to do is pigeonhole them into a specific category, but look at what the commonality is. So for both of those use cases, one thing that is in common is that they both have a connection to an extension of the existing VxRail environment. And that's really where we see a lot of use cases going with there's over 10,000 VxRail users today. So, how do they extend their existing environment in new ways? So that's what this is about.
So all in those two examples, they still are managed within the LCM structure.
Yeah. So obviously the management element is critical. So with a dynamic node extension of the VxRail environment in HCI mesh, yes, you have the capability to kind of recapture some of that vSAN from the primary VxRail deployment model. And what you're hitting on is kind of the nature of VxRail HCI system software, which you've probably heard us talk a lot about, which is the core connective software between the hardware infrastructure elements and up the stack. So we are continuing to innovate and evolve around that concept to reach out into the ecosystem and pull more of that into the same VxRail operating experience.
No, that's great. So we can keep talking about these new infrastructure types for days, but there's two other trends to weigh in on, and both of those, we can talk about in great depth too today. So we'll try to stick to the notes and stay on track. The third trend is infrastructure automation with AI ops. I'm a big believer in automation. So can you tell our members exactly what AI ops means?
So big picture here, it's about a holistic approach to infrastructure management. So it combines a few things: leveraging telemetry for end-to-end visibility across the infrastructure layers, then analyzing this information, leveraging AI and ML so that you can detect, correlate, remediate risk more quickly, efficiently, and accurately, pinpointing, where's the problem areas? Where do I need to focus my precious time and energy? And then also integrating into IT service management workflow tools to help automate some of those complex workflows and work toward this vision of a self-healing, self-correcting infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in automation, and within our team, we're certainly focused on it. And we, along with I think a lot of folks, are evolving to try to develop a more holistic approach, but going even broader than the infrastructure itself and reaching out, including automations, sometimes at the applications layer. Can you tell me more about automating remediation? Like, how might members think about this going forward?
Yeah, well, I think at some point the scale of the data and the application landscape are going to grow to a point where you literally can't throw enough like bodies at the problem with the traditional approaches. So really the concept of AI ops is probably going to become more table stakes. But what is the game changer is really having infrastructure that's smart enough to highlight problem areas or predict issues before they occur, and then allowing that infrastructure to automatically take action to remediate it without those IT resources. So that's kind of the concept of remediation is you still have control. You get to tell it when you want it to take action, but the capability for it to do so will be there.
Oh, that's super interesting. So all about helping people reduce the investment that they have to make in managing and remediating problems. Um, that's great. Moving on to our final topic, as a service consumption. We've been rationalizing workloads for what feels like forever, right? Literally the past decade, leveraging software as a service. And now there's IaaS, PaaS, DRaaS, everything as, right? Um, you know, at Dell Technologies World, Apex was clearly the focus. What are the benefits of the as a service consumption model that Dell sees?
Well, if you think about the continued rapid growth in HCI, which many of the Converge members are users of, as well as kind of the rapid adoption of public cloud, both of those are a testament to the fact that more and more customers are looking to increase their focus on delivering outcomes, simplifying management, like you just talked about. And Apex is just taking that one step further and really delivering an end-to-end portfolio as a service. So it's designed to deliver the public cloud like experience and simplicity, but with increased control by having your infrastructure on-prem. So the basis of Apex offers will include flexible consumption. So thinking about how you're paying for technology. Also, they'll be owned and managed by Dell Technologies, meaning we'll do the deployment, the upgrades, the support, and then also having it integrated into a web-based console. So this is the public cloud-like experience where you're managing, procuring technology through this console. So all those elements, but still the infrastructure itself will be on premises in a customer operated infrastructure environment. It's really interesting trend. Both IDC and Gartner are predicting a huge surge in demand in this area in the next few years. IDC is predicting more than 75% of infrastructure and applications and 50% of data center infrastructure will be consumed as a service. That's huge numbers. Gartner as well, within the next couple of years, 43% of newly developed storage capacity consumed as OpEx, up from about 15%. So, they're definitely anticipating an inflection point, but we do expect this transition to take some time. And we recognize, every customer is at a different point in their journey here with different considerations. So I'm curious, like from your perspective, what's your philosophy on as a service? Where has it worked well, and what are you thinking about it for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we're like a lot of folks are kind of middle of the road. We've got some things where it seems like it makes a lot of sense, and I think some things where we're still questioning the value of that. I think everybody will be at a different point. One of the things that I think is key to this transition is the relationship that IT has with finance, right? Like, this opens up different conversations about what an organization's strategy is on capital, things like capital versus expense, investing in the assets themselves versus truly operating things that traditionally were capital investments as a service. So I think some of the tips I'd have for members, certainly as we get into these kinds of discussions about expense model as a service, I think everybody needs to probably spend more time with their finance teams, partnering to understand, how these work, so that so that there aren't surprises. Certainly with a capital investment, there's a very clear structure up front. As you get into more of an on-demand or expense model, there's opportunities for surprise if you don't really track those things. I think in terms of moving towards OpEx spending, I think organizations have to kind of create their own guidelines about what they, their strategy is for, what parts of their organization or infrastructure or applications they want to move to expense model versus, maintain as a CapEx model. I think that equation is going to be different for every organization. Certainly, I've talked to a lot of folks recently, and they're all over the place. And some organizations still want to keep a very traditional CapEx model. Some organizations really want to embrace very much a cloud-like on-demand services as you pay as you go model. So, I think what's important for our members is to really understand what their organization's strategy is, and make sure as they're bringing infrastructure opportunities like this, that they're partnering with their finance teams to understand, so that they don't. The last thing you want to do is waste time pursuing a strategy that your organization isn't going to support. So I think understanding and working through that up front probably will help everybody make these kind of decisions go faster. So Shannon, this has been a great conversation. Before we wrap up, many of our members have pretty significant investments in infrastructure already. How are these 4 trends going to impact them?
Well, obviously, they're going to have to throw away everything that they have and start from scratch, buy all new Dell technologies gear. No, just kidding, obviously. I think you'll see within HCI and CI an evolution in the innovation roadmap is designed to intersect with these trends. So you'll see DPU offerings within our hyper-converged portfolio. You'll see, disaggregated and composable already as components of how we're broadening the use cases for HCI today to, expand that ecosystem. With AI ops, we're already building that into the infrastructure today, and as a service consumption will be built upon all these offers. So they're really designed to be, modular in nature, deliver some of this through software updates. Maybe it's add on to, hardware platforms, but definitely not expecting a rip and replace on all of these emerging trends.
That's good to hear. Thanks. So I think we're at time, but before we wrap up, we wanted to provide some links where you could get more information. We've got a link here for the latest info on VxRail. That's vxrail.is/reimaginehci. If you're interested in learning more about Oshkosh Corporation, you can find that at oshkoshcorp.com/story. And to learn more about Converged User Group, to join if you're not a member already, that's convergedusergroup.com. So thank you, everybody. Follow us on Twitter. Again, I want to thank Shannon Champion, VP of Product Marketing at Dell Technologies. And thanks, everyone, for joining. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Matt.